we can just dive, we can just dive right into it.
That sounds great. I'm also having audio issues. I just want to make sure that folks can hear me. Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I first just want to start by introducing Amy Ramsdell, who is our new division administrator for delivery and operations. So she is a new face to this group, I think. She's formerly just transitioning out of being the division administrator for the commerce and compliance division. Amy, I don't know if you were here with that role before, but you weren't. Okay. This is a pretty dynamic group who has both statutorily required um, uh, topics that we will be addressing, and today is one of those. Just a little bit of framing for everybody. One of the statutory requirements for the CIAC is to hear about projects over $50 million on an annual basis. So that is in law. And so that is the agenda item that will be coming before you today. I think just so folks are tracking, and we'll talk a little bit more about this after the region has done their presentation, but we found in the review of our projects that we only had one project this time that met this threshold. And so Tova's been doing a little bit of work on kind of how do we better project kind of what's in the queue, and how do we take a look at that kind of over more than just this 12-month period. And so at the end of the presentation, I'm hopeful Tova can talk a little bit about those pieces. But we have on the agenda today, the one project that hit the threshold was our Region 3 project, which is the Scottsburg Bridge. And we've got our Region 3 team here. And I think, Darren, do you mind going to hand it over to you?
Sounds good. Good afternoon, everybody. Darren Neville, Region 3 Manager. And I'll let Chris introduce himself.
I'm Chris Hunter, Southwest Area Region 3 Area Manager.
Good. And we're excited to talk about Scottsburg Bridge. We think it was a successful project. So, Michaela, were you going to pull it up, you said? Good. Just a couple things. As I said, we're excited about this project. Excited to come share about how it went with you. We're proud of the contractor that did the work, our design team, and also our construction crew that managed the project. Just a couple weeks ago, we were in Coos Bay doing the JCT tour and got lots of comments as most of the legislators drove over it as they headed to Coos Bay. And so lots of hand claps and hoorays about the project and the bridge. So we're excited to hear that. Also, I would just say lots of support from the community, and you'll hear that as Chris talks about the details of what we went through. But lots of good support right within Scottsburg, and then within just the general area of getting this bridge replaced. So let's go to the next slide. So Umpqua River, Umpqua Highway, it connects southern Oregon to the Interstate 5. It follows along the Umpqua River through Scottsburg, Elk Bend, and then finally ends at Reedsport. It is the seismic lifeline for the coastal communities. So this is our priority route. If we were ever to have that Cascadia or major earthquake along the coast, that we would try and get prepared for it. And then if we have to respond to it, this is the one we would try and open up. And it would get, it's the only route that we would focus on from Florence to Brookings to get folks to and from I-5 there. It's a vital economic route for freight, lots of freight traffic on this, and a huge tourism connection to the Oregon Dunes. On the weekends, you will see lots of trailers heading to the coast with toys on them. And so it gets pretty congested during those times. And then there is no local alternative route when Scottsburg Bridge closed. Hopefully with the new bridge, we're not going to see those, but we did see quite a few of those in the past. And so what traffic would have to do is either take 126 from Eugene down to Florence and over, or go down I-5 farther through Roseburg and then down 42 to the coast. And it added an hour, 30 minutes to an hour, depending on kind of where they were going on the route there. So, next slide. So location, it is just 16 miles west of Reedsport, right along the Umpqua River, over the Umpqua River. It's right in the community of Scottsburg. They have about 200 people. There's neighborhoods on kind of both sides of the bridge. And this is a very steep area, very, very vertical on both sides. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the design and what that looked like. Also, the bridge, or if you look in the right-hand corner there picture, you'll see a boulder there. There was a lot of those in the river. And as we were investigating this and looking at kind of what we're going to do there, notice those came from the hillsides and have came down through the years. And so there was definitely some evidence of past earthquakes and slides through this area. Next slide. So what was the problem? It was originally built in 1929, little space for bicycles, pedestrians, and two-way traffic even. It was tight for two-way traffic through there, especially on those as you enter the bridge. Crashes required the bridge closure for repair. I would even say maintenance work even caused us to close that sometimes because we just didn't have the room. And then the bridge was vulnerable to earthquakes. It just wasn't built for that. On a personal note, I would just say it saved me a lot of saved my hearing probably, because my wife, every time we took our camp trailer across there, would be hollering at me to slow down, move over, whatever. And then our maintenance crews constantly picked up mirrors and awnings off this bridge because of camp trailers hitting either the bridge or a passing vehicle, and they'd lose their mirrors or the awnings. We had awnings that were down in the river also. So it was a real problem. The crash that you see, the picture you see, was a crash that happened in 2014-15. This closed the bridge for about a week. Very concerned whether it was going to be weight restricted after it hit, because it hit so hard. And so this really was kind of the last big crash that we had that really got people concerned around the area about needing to do something with this bridge. All right, next slide, I think. Yeah, so I'll let Chris kind of take on kind of what we did, what was the solution, and how we got there. So
yeah, so as Darren explained, couple things, this is a rural area, tight corridor. And so we're looking at this, it did have tight corners into this bridge. And so one thing, even because of the size of it, we did do kind of a value engineering, looking at alternatives on what we should do with this structure. And as House Bill 2017 came in, provided that funding that we could actually, replace the bridge rather than continue just to provide repairs and maintenance on the structure. So we had the value engineering. There was 50 plus different ideas that we kind of vetted through the process. Several of those we did implement. Some of the initial thought is we were going to be looking at, just as an example, kind of a singular column. Out of that came, no, it was cheaper to do a couple different columns, build that up into the, caps and other things. And so through the VE kind of study area, we kind of estimated that we saved $500 to $700 plus $1,000 in some design modifications through that process. So there was definitely we found a lot of value in that. Also, recommendations to obviously replace the bridge with a more modern bridge, the wider deck, standard shoulders, to accommodate, all modes of traffic, which the prior bridge did not have. The new alignment, like I already mentioned, to kind of help take out some of those sharp curves that we had on both ends, but also make sure that we're providing clearance for maritime traffic. We had to coordinate quite a bit with the Coast Guard and others to make sure that we were meeting the requirements that they had. This structure, it's at an interesting location. The Coast Guard has, in essence, some authority just downstream of it, but not upstream. This bridge was the dividing line between their jurisdiction. And so working through various aspects, got a little confusing at times on this project, but we had good relations and managed to work through those real well. We also added some decorative features. You can kind of see some of the arches. We also incorporated some of those features into the railing on the bridge and also the portals at each end to kind of pay homage to the original bridge, the historic bridge. And that was part of our mitigation efforts to address the historical nature of the structure. We've got some old pictures of the historic 1964 floods that were basically right at the bottom of this bridge, almost took this bridge out. And so as another feature we added is we actually put into the concrete and set in the concrete that 1964 level, because that's one thing folks always like to kind of reference back to. So we incorporated some of those features into this new structure as we built it. And then the other key piece is by putting this on a new alignment and straightening out those curves, that actually afforded us to keep the old bridge open while we constructed the new bridge, which obviously from a traffic standpoint, mobility, commerce, was really beneficial because we could keep traffic going. As Darren mentioned, detour routes pretty much didn't have one unless you went up to 126 or down to 42, and that adds quite a bit of time depending on where you're coming from or going to. So next slide. And this is kind of just an overview of kind of what that looked like. And so the green was the old original Scottsburg Bridge, the 1929 bridge. And it's kind of to scale, so you can kind of see how narrow that bridge was in comparison to the new bridge on a new alignment. And so with our design, we were able to completely build this new structure, the approaches, the attachments, pretty much everything prior to opening up the new bridge and decommissioning the old bridge. Next slide. So the project scope, obviously build a new bridge, like we mentioned, constructed, and when they did that, there was 2 temporary bridges that needed to be constructed. This picture shows you one of them. That's the temporary bridge to build the existing or the new structure. But we also then had to put in temporary bridges to decommission the old bridge. So it was downstream of the old bridge, upstream of the new bridge. We had to shoehorn in a couple additional work bridges when it became time to remove that existing structure. On the south end, so the lower left of this structure, we had to realign our highway, obviously, to meet the new alignment of the new bridge, but then also tie in Letsinger Creek Road, which is kind of on the right side that continues up the river. So we had to do some modifications to that. We did some modifications on the north end, the far end, because the Scottsburg West Road and the Main Street come under the bridge. And there's also a little shoe fly that you can kind of see. We had to build a retaining wall. But we had to do some modifications up there to accommodate local traffic as well within the community. We also utilized what we call some deep soil mixing. It's basically stabilization of the existing ground, where you drill down into it, inject grout, cement to basically firm it up and make a solid base. We did that in order to help us with the liquefaction issues during a potential seismic event. being along the river and the type of soil this is, we need a really good foundation. So we looked at some various different types of foundations and landed on doing this deep soil mixing to stabilize, create this foundation using the existing soil with additional grout to make it solid, no longer liquefactionable, so the foundation of the structure would remain in place. And I think Darren mentioned as well, that seismic resiliency piece, we built a rock berm. One is kind of on the south side of the bridge, so kind of in this lower left corner where some of the, in between the two alignments of the road is where that berm is. And then we have kind of a big hole on the north end to catch kind of a rockfall catchment. Because as Darren mentioned, there's a lot of rocks out in the river here that we determined have actually come down off of these hillsides. They're pretty steep. And so from a seismic resiliency standpoint, we landed on how do we protect this bridge? And so we have a large berm on one side to kind of protect those rocks from, if they come off the hill, coming down and hitting the structure, on the other side to try and catch them. And so those were some features that were added to this project as well. Next slide. So to talk about some of the funding. So we've got several different funds in this. We had some of our statewide fix-it bridge funds, $10 million. Some money out of the region, as well as House Bill, which was the major part of this, almost $40 million from the House Bill discretionary funds. And so overall, the whole project budget is sitting just over $50 million. Next. So continuing with project costs, kind of looking at that design phase, engineering was just under $3 million. We had right-of-way costs of 1.4, some utility relocation and other costs that we had around almost 300,000. And then the other phase, which is 150,000, is some of that historical mitigation. And we're working on some of that designs now. We have, in essence, like a kind of display board kiosk that we have to still install on this project as part of the historical mitigation that'll talk about kind of the historic bridge, some pictures, some other things. And so that work is yet to be completed, but those designs and contracts are underway. And so total design was roughly around, almost $5 million. Again, the 45 million total for construction, and then that project total of 50.4 million. Next.
Chris, could you go into a little more detail on what the historical mitigation you're planning to do?
Yeah, so there's a lot of pieces that go into historical mitigation. Some of it is just the features, like even in this picture that you see, the old bridge had some arches, some other things in it. And so we incorporated, some of that, what you would almost call, Condimacola type features, arches, lines, some of those aesthetic features up on the bridge rail, where the bridge rail attaches in between the metal rails itself. We've got, again, arches, some lines, some aesthetic features. We'll have a picture, I think, at the end where you can kind of see the approach to the bridge where we've got I've just lost the name of them, but those portal entryways, corbels coming onto the bridge. They're lighted. And so on the bridge itself, we included some aesthetic treatments as part of our mitigation. But then kind of about in the middle of the picture where you see the excavator, we've got some property there, and we're going to have kind of a historical sign be put up there that will inform the public, give them some history of the old bridge. Like I said, I haven't seen the final design, but it'll likely have a picture of the old bridge, talk about the old bridge and its history, and some information about when this new bridge was constructed. And that's part of all of our historical requirements that we have as we work through Historical Preservation Office. It was a 1929 bridge. It wasn't, significantly unique bridge, but it was still historical. And so we typically have mitigation requirements that we have to do with those historical structures when we remove one. As a side note, we did try to sell the bridge. Not every day you get to, hey, you want to buy a bridge? But we tried. Because, that's first thing is try to keep this bridge whole. Can someone else use it? Can it go somewhere else? Keep its historical feature. Unfortunately, we didn't get any bidders. It cost a lot to relocate a bridge of that size that it was. Plus, the old steel structures are typically coated in a lead-based paint for preservation. And so now you have, a hazardous material, potential contamination that you're dealing with when you're trying to sell a bridge. So ultimately, we weren't able to sell it. We had to decommission it and basically tear it apart and haul it off, which still required some various requirements and handling requirements because of the lead-based paint on the structure.
Hey, Chris, could you speak a little bit to kind of the community engagement in that historical component?
Yeah, we had a lot of engagement with the community throughout the design and the construction of this bridge. The community, they've got pictures of some of the first cars coming across it, and I think you'll see on the letter, we included them, to be the first ones across this bridge. The community was very supportive of a new bridge, though, because they recognized the hazards with the old bridge, but they definitely had a connection to the old bridge. And so they appreciated everything that we'd done. We'd look towards them for a lot of our historical information as we gathered that information and the input that they provided. And they were integral to some of the design and this information signage that we're going to be providing. And just as another little side note, previous project that had happened, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, there was a certain resident in the community that had an issue with ODOT and our project, and they had actually put up a sign that kind of bashed ODOT, and it had been there for, I don't know, Darren, at least 15 or 20 years. But during this project and our communication and working with the community and the partnership we had there was one day that sign came down. He repainted his sign, and it was a big sign, repainted it white. And at first, kind of thought, oh, what's he going to put on the board this time? But it remained blank for the duration of the project. And when we got done, he's put something else on it, but no longer bashing ODOT. And we actually rebuilt kind of a relationship with that gentleman that had that sign. And so we've actually, improved some things in the community with the replacement of that structure.
Yeah. I'd also had just our historical staff did an amazing job coming down, meeting with the community. I think they met 2 or 3 times there with the community, just having them bring in the old pictures and stuff. And they collected all that information. And so we have that history. Yeah,
the community is definitely they're tied to the history of Scottsburg, the community there. And so, definitely lots of information they provided forward for us. Next slide. So this is funding breakdown on the construction side. Our original contract was $39.5 million. We only had 2 bidders on this project. The next bidder was significantly higher than that. This is the low bid. We had anticipated items around $222,000, a contingency of almost 1.8, construction engineering around $4 million. And so an original construction budget of 45.5, almost $45.6 million. And fortunately, we're able to stay within that. We haven't had to get any additional increases of authorization for the construction of this project. And so we've remained at that original authorization of the $45.6 million. Next.
Looks like Paula has a question.
Oh, go ahead, Paula.
Thank you, Chris. Can you tell me how you set your contingency?
Generally, our contingency is like 3.5% of the biddable items. And depending on the project and some of the complexities, we can adjust that a little bit. Sometimes we'll go to 4.5, depending on concerns we may have. but on the majority of our projects, it's 3.5%.
Okay, thanks.
You bet. Next. Touch a little bit on the civil rights aspect of it and some of the goals. We had a 4% goal assigned to this project for the utilization of disadvantaged businesses. We actually achieved almost 8%, so we almost doubled our assigned goal, which is great. I think in the letter we mentioned that we have a statewide goal overall of almost 23%. We do struggle in rural areas. Sometimes, one meeting maybe even a 20%, but trying to get sometimes around that 6 to 8 to 10% is a struggle when we're working in rural areas. And so a lot of times our projects will have smaller goals. We're trying to push that envelope on newer projects these days, and we're trying to apply 6 to 8 to 10% now on most of them. This one had a pretty low goal at 4%. But like I said, we achieved almost 8%, which was great. Ted, do I see your hand up? I think you're on mute, Ted.
I'm sorry. Understand there's a number of claims on the project. Your 45 million, does that include any of the money that's there in claims, or is that on the side?
No, that does not include any potential for claims, and I'll touch on that in a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you. Moving on, we also had on-job training apprenticeship hours of 7,200. We've got almost 10,000, 9,800 hours were achieved on the project. DBE payment percentage of 4%, we achieved 11. And then some areas that we don't have assigned goals, but we track. So equal opportunity employment of female utilization, we're at 2.8. And equal employment opportunity for minority utilization, we are at 18.23% on this project. Next slide. So the schedule, we started design September 2015, and it seems like a long time between 15 and 19. But for a project of this large, it takes some time dealing with some of the geotech aspects. You're building a river. This is a really long bridge, the seismic components and investigation. And so, we spent a good amount of time preparing the design. We got it out to bid in November of 2019, issued our first note, which is telling the contractor, go to work, start submitting all your required information, documentation, and let's get going. That was in February of 2020. And we had an original completion date of August 31st of 2022. We actually didn't complete this project, and we issued second note in October 25th of 23. And I can get into some of that right now. So in essence, we got the project underway. We have really tight in-water work periods. There was a lot of work to be done. We did get this structure open to traffic in August of 2022. The part of the premises of that was also we had the World Track Meet up in Eugene. We were trying to get projects open. We didn't want to hamper any of our highways. So working with the contractor, we did some acceleration to get the new bridge open sooner. And we were able to achieve that. But with that came some other issues and some concerns, and we didn't get all the rest of our earthwork or other items done within that time frame, and we got pushed up against weather. So we ended up having to shut the project down for the winter of 2022, and then we resumed that in 23, and then finished all of the earthwork and some minor paving in 23. Next slide. So challenges. We worked through the pandemic. That was a challenge. There was a few times that the contractors team had caught COVID. Some subcontractors had caught COVID. Some of them managed to still work, even if they had COVID. They were trucking in material, so they continued to kind of truck in material, but weren't exposing themselves to anyone else. But trying to maintain safe distances, all those things through the pandemic, provided for a challenge, but we did continue to work on this project, and overall we're successful without, getting everybody sick and having major shutdowns on the project. As mentioned earlier, we have tight in-water work periods, July 1st to August 31st. And so that 2-month time frame to build a lot of this, the work bridge, build the foundations of the new bridge, not a lot of times to do it. And that's why this was a 3-season project to start with, because you got to get that work bridge in first, then you need a season to build the new bridge, and then you need a season to get everything back out. And so we worked through that fairly well, but it definitely provided some challenges. Trying to decide on the level of seismic resiliency. Like I mentioned, we built some large berms. You can kind of see a little bit of one starting, in this picture on the lower right, that's actually where the hole is. There was a pile of material there. That's been excavated. We've actually got a hole in that location, but we have a large berm on the other end of that bridge. Because again, we're looking at all these boulders, things we saw on the river. Where did those come from? We made some determinations. They came off these hillside. In fact, on this hillside to the left of this lower picture up on there, the folks, there's a timber company that owns some of that property. They actually have some large boulders cabled off to the rest of the rock up on the hillside, holding things in place. And so with all those things, we figured we need to be trying to do something to help protect that bridge. And so, how far do you go to that resiliency for a seismic event? We kind of had to work through that. And so there were some challenges there. I mentioned we had the World Athletic Championships of July 22. We wanted to get the bridge open for that, which we were successful at. Rural areas, we don't always get a lot of bidders. We only had 2 bidders on this project. In fact, the second bidder of this project turned into being a sub for the first bidder, and performed some of the work. But they were initially competitors on this project. And then again, DBE goals for rural projects, sometimes it's difficult when, we have the statewide goal of roughly about 23%. It's hard to achieve those goals in rural areas. We just don't have the resources or availability, especially in a low bid situation. We can bring DBEs from outside the area, but you're talking travel time, more cost, and other things. There was a question about who the successful bidder was. This was Hamilton Construction Company was the successful bidder on this project. Malcolm was the second bidder on this project. And then Malcolm ended up being a sub for Hamilton on this project. As Ted asked, we do have 3 claims on the project. I think we're sitting around 11.5 million is what the claimed amount is. We're working through those now, and I think I mentioned in the letter, depending on the outcome of those claims, we may be able to come back. We may afford some lessons learned as we get through that. But we're right in the middle of that claims process, so I didn't want to speak to it too much. The basis of the claim is kind of around the deep soil mixing. They're all 3 are kind of tied together. It's not like 3 completely different claims. So the initial claim was around deep soil mixing. A follow-up claim was really on a subcontractor that got pushed to trying to perform work outside of normal building time frames for some of the earthwork. And then the third claim is predominantly time, asking for some additional time on the project, and then a few ancillary items around that. And so the 3 claims, they're kind of all intertied, and roughly sitting at 11.5 million. And like I said, we're in that process. My personal opinion is we're not gonna pay 11.5 million, but again, we're in that process, so. Paula, you have a question?
Yeah, and just sort of aligned with the claims, how many change orders did you have on this project? Were you taking care of those as you went along, or were these 3 kind of claims that could be change orders that you've held off settling?
Some of these were, I guess, protests, not necessarily change orders. We addressed the change orders along the way. Don't have the number right off the top of my head, but I can pull it up.
I'll look for it, Chris.
Yeah, I think overall the claim, well, one, they wanted additional time, and so sometimes we argue about, are you really afforded time? Who caused the delays? And so we got to work through that piece. But we did have, I mean, we had several change orders within this project altogether. I think I have it right here. If my spreadsheet opens. I think we ended up with, it was like 24 or something. I'm trying to look, maybe 24 or 5 change orders on this project. Some are significant, some are not, some are no cost change orders. We changed some of the colors of the wall. We painted this wall that you see in the lower right corner. Originally, it was a kind of a gray, and it just didn't look right out there. So as they started painting it, we changed. We bought that paint, so low cost change order to make some modifications. Sometimes it's change orders for specification modifications to allow things that just made sense on the project. Others are larger. We had really, I guess what I would consider only one larger change to the project itself, which was around bent 8, which in this lower picture on the screen, kind of where those cranes are sitting, we changed the wing type and foundation of that bent 8 abutment that allowed us to modify some traffic control, actually saved us a lot of cost in traffic control, pilot car usage, some other things, and allowed them to build that without impeding traffic or having to install additional traffic control. And it made sense for the project, but it did change the wing wall type from a kind of a spread footing type to a soldier pile wall kind of tied back. And so, we make some changes like that because, hey, it makes sense. Once we have the contractor on board, we know, what issues we're going to run into. It was really tight from a traffic control standpoint. And so we agreed that, yeah, we need to make some changes here. And so that was in my mind, the biggest change on the project. Most everything else was fairly small, but that's also why we've stayed within our existing authorization.
Hey, Chris, 31 change orders.
31, okay.
Yep.
And in my mind, that seems like a lot of change orders. This was a 3-season project, and so you do, the longer you have a project open, you run into those things. We definitely had some other design changes and other things along the way. But again, as far as significant changes, there's really only that one that I can think of.
Yeah, total 817,000 for all the change orders.
Okay, perfect. Next slide. So what went well? Overall, the bridge itself went really well. We've constructed a seismically engineered and aesthetically pleasing bridge on a priority lifeline route that's critical not just to the community, but all the surrounding communities. And as Darren mentioned at the beginning, just that commerce, that vacation travel, this highway is used a lot by a lot of people to get to and from the coast. And so, we were very successful in that. We eliminated some safety concerns on the original, the old bridge, we'd strapped wood posts to some of the metal beams at the end just because that bridge got hit so much by those awnings and mirrors. We put sacrificial wood beams on the end to take that impact rather than the bridge. And I think the last accident we had, I think Darren was referring to it, it almost collapsed this bridge. And so that's how concerned we were with the viability of this bridge remaining in place, because we had to shut it down. Initially, we were allowing smaller local traffic across it, and we ultimately, after working with our engineers, we had to shut that down because they were concerned that this bridge was going to collapse until we could get in there and get the repairs done to strengthen it back up. And so that's how vulnerable that was. And so definitely successful in building a new bridge. Our collaboration with regulatory agencies went really well. Like I mentioned, we had the Coast Guard putting regulations and requirements on the downstream end of the bridge, upstream, of course, dealing with NOAA Fisheries, ODF&W, all of our other regulatory agencies. But that coordination, permit extensions, other things all went really well. Community involvement, again, exemplary. We really built a lot of trust and relationships with the community. They held their own kind of ceremony event. They had big potlucks, tents, music, all kinds of things that they did celebrating the completion of this bridge. We allowed them to kind of do a parade, the first ones across this bridge, and they really appreciated that. And then also invited them back when ODOT did our own kind of celebration at the end, acknowledging its opening of the bridge. And so a lot of community involvement and a lot of relationship building that we were able to do there. We've also, the consultant and some of the contractors that applied for awards, and we've received some engineering excellence awards through ACEC, and also received an excellent concrete award from OCAPA, which is the Oregon Concrete and Aggregate Producers Association on this bridge. So like I said, definitely proud of the accomplishments on what went well. You know, plus with the seismic resiliency, these berms, you can kind of see the berm in that lower picture. At the far top of that lower picture, you can see a big earthen berm. Hopefully it's got grass on it now. But just from a seismic resiliency, like I said, I think this bridge is going to be there for a long time and the community loves it. So next slide.
Looks like Ted has a question.
Okay, go ahead, Ted. Sorry. You're still on mute.
You're gonna have to unmute yourself, Ted.
Sorry. Chris, I'm just curious on the soil stabilization and mixing. Did we learn some lessons? We have we have a problem with that, getting it accepted almost every job. Did we learn enough that we've got some idea how to do that better and get it approved?
Well, and that's where I think as we work through the claims that we may have some lessons learned that we'll be able to share at a later point. I really don't want to dive into it yet because it kind of depends on where we land. I mean, I've definitely got my opinions, but the contractor obviously has a different opinion. That's why we have a claim. And so as we work through that, I think we had offered up that we're happy to come back once we kind of get through that settlement piece on what that claim looks like and share, because I do think there might be some lessons learned that comes out of that. I know during this project, we had coordinated quite a bit with Federal Highway and their experts around deep soil mixing. We also had a consultant on board that's worked around deep soil mixing and have done that in the past. Deep soil mixing is used a lot for vertical construction, but this was kind of a new application. Again, we were using it more for liquefaction. And so just working through some of those nuances, like I said, in that claim, that I think there may be some learnings that come out of it, but I'm really not not open to discussing it, at least currently, but happy to come back once we get through that, because I think there are some things that we can learn or apply to future projects.
That would be great. I think let's try and kind of make a note to have you come back, because I think this is an issue that we're going to continue to have as we, work on bridges and we can do a better job with it, then that would be a good result.
Yeah, no, I think
My concern on it is there's other projects coming out with it, and
yes.
and contractors don't know where to go on it, so they're raising the pricing. And the sooner we could get something out that's more standard, more acceptable, and contractors know what's going to be accepted, I think pricing will go down and it'll benefit everybody.
I agree with you, Ted. Internally, we are having some of those conversations and trying to share some of that information that we've got, so they kind of understand why we're where we are, at least on this project. So we are trying to have some of those conversations internally, but you're absolutely right. I've heard it from the contractors and others that there's definitely some hesitancy with the deep soil mixing on other projects. So,
Chris, I think that there's absolutely an opportunity, and I think I'm flagging it, and I will pull you and some folks working on other projects with ground improvement and liquefaction mitigation, so we can gather all that together and look at what we can do from a standpoint of our specs and designs and estimates. So Ted and Paula, thank you for that.
Right.
yeah, thank you, Tova. Next slide.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Darren.
Nope. Thanks, Chris. Before we get to these, any other questions around the project?
I do have one more, and I couldn't find the raise hand. So what I didn't see on your financial listing what your engineer's estimate was versus what your low bid was. How close were they?
So we were about $6.8 million over our engineer's estimate.
Was that at the time when inflation started running up, or was that kind of before the big swing?
It was before, in our opinion, it was before. And I know, overall, the low bid was at almost 39.5 million. Our estimate was a little over, it was 32.6 million. The next low bidder was at 53.2 million. So quite a bit significantly higher. As we looked at it and we did our bid analysis, I really couldn't necessarily attribute all of this to the pandemic or inflation. It was kind of right at the end. There were some specific items that really looked to cause that increase. So our temporary features, and primarily the detour bridges, or not the detour bridges, the work bridges, cost us significantly more. And I think it was just our estimation more than anything that was off. One, this steel girder structure, we haven't done a large steel girder structure like this in quite a while. So I think just some of our understanding of the bidding environment, and then the work bridges with the short time frames really increased costs. So for the temporary bridges, they were about $2.8 million higher than what we'd kind of estimated for some of those temporary features. The other big item was really the bridge itself. The bridge itself was almost $3 million. I'm trying to find the right tab here. It was $3.8 million higher than what we had anticipated. And the big items that kind of caused that increase on that was the curved steel girders. So if you look at this lower picture, you can see the start of this bridge, it's on a curved section. And then it's got a lot of straight steel girders. Well, we did okay with the bids and our bid estimate on the straight girders, but these curved girders cost us almost $1.3 million more than what we'd estimated. And again, part of it, I think, is its rural location. You're hauling these steel girders down a narrow, windy highway to get it here. And so I think some of it's cost in transport plus manufacturing. And so, those aspects definitely, increase the cost. And then the only other significant item was concrete. The concrete bridge, the deck, and some of the structural concrete on this was almost another $1.8 million increase over our estimate. And again, I think most of this concrete came out of Eugene because of its rural nature and the contractor or the sub that they were working with to get their material. You're talking, you got to get it there, still meeting our requirements. It's quite a little haul, so you got to make sure that it hasn't set off yet. You got to be able to get it placed. And so I think it's just some of our bidding environment. I think if it was more inflation or other things, it would have hit us on so many different items. For example, asphalt was about 150,000 over our estimate, which isn't terrible, thinking again, they're hauling that down from Eugene. So it wasn't a terrible increase. And so I really don't feel it was inflation or the pandemic at this point when it was bid.
So you might, on the next slide where you talk about lessons learned or I can't remember. It may be a note on a follow-up or lessons learned on the project is to flag how you're going to estimate unique features. Ted mentioned the soil mixing,
right?
Things like curved steel members and distance from plants, those kinds of things. Seems like a unique kind of a bridge, and it's beautiful, by the way. But those are going to require different techniques in estimating or at least recognition of the risks there.
Yeah, and some of that plays into that is we do have suppliers that are closer, but that's not the suppliers they used. And so some areas, we got really good prices, lower than our estimate. Other areas was higher, but those were definitely some of the significant areas where within our estimate, we missed it, in all honesty. So that really kind of accounts for that, $6.8 million of additional cost.
Ted, looks like you got a question too.
Yeah, Chris, just real quick, you used weathering steel core 10 on the girders. Isn't this beyond the zone where ODOT was not using core 10 because of the salt air? Or was it not?
No, what we'd found, even in this area, as long as we're not coating the entire thing, we're still okay in this area. We're just kind of right at that tidal influence area, which is why the Coast Guard's kind of jurisdiction ends just downstream of that. And so we weren't totally concerned over that aspect, Ted. But we determined that this would be just fine and weather just great in this area.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Rod.
I'm curious why the material came out of Eugene. Wouldn't a plant in the Coos Bay North Bend area have been a lot closer and wouldn't have, for lack of a better word, run up against those time constraints that you were mentioning?
Ted, I don't disagree, or Rod, I don't disagree with you. It's just, I don't control where they get their materials. That's really up to the contractor and their suppliers. My guess is we do have a Knife River material source, Coos Bay locally, more local. I don't know if they got bids from them or quotes from them on materials as well, but they went with a different source that for both their paving and their concrete. And so we don't control that. My guess is they must have got better prices out of these other areas, or they wouldn't have gone that direction.
Okay, well, maybe that's part of the improving the bidding competition that you're talking about in rural areas. You have goals such as for DBE and so on, maybe have some goals centered around using more local resources, if at all possible, right? Or there's a bonus in the contract if you use local resources, more so than trying to move everything from a metro region out into those of us in the hinterlands. I guess is the best way I can put it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the thoughts, Rod, and I don't disagree with you. Those things potentially come with a cost though. Because like I said, if they're not getting the best price locally and we're gonna force that, well, we'll pay for it. And you know, and I recognize I would love if they all used local resources more. It's better for our local economy and everything else. And I definitely support that. But from an overall taxpayer standpoint, is that the right decision? I don't know, something we can certainly talk about, and maybe Tova will take a note on that one too, and we can talk about that in the future.
Yeah, we got that written down.
Thank you.
Good.
Well, I appreciate all the comments, questions. If you have others, if not, I'm going to turn it over to Darren to kind of wrap this up.
Good. Yeah, we had just two other questions, I guess, for you. Your group is just kind of how do we improve bidding competition in rural areas and kind of that DBE, how do we increase that availability? And then if you have other things we should be considering, we're definitely want to hear that too.
Yeah, and we made a note about obviously sort of a local goal for using local resources. Definitely appreciate those thoughts. And then as we work through the claims aspect of this project, like I said, more than happy to come back because we're definitely going to be having some internal conversations around kind of this deep soil mixing type of aspect with not just this project but other projects. So definitely happy to come back.
Yeah,
I would just add that the how the claim turns out, as we've been all talking about the budget moving forward for ODOT, that it's going to have some other ramification if you have to pay up to 11 million or whatever the number was. So I'm just curious when you settle finally, how that's all justified, and you know how the bridge program, I assume that's where it's coming from, then what other impacts does that have on other projects?
Yeah, we can definitely talk about that when we come back.
Yeah.
Our hope is there's no impact, but we'll see.
That's always the hope, but you're absolutely right. I mean, if there is a settlement where we've got to pay out, yeah, depending on the size of that, there's definitely impact potentially to the program or other areas.
Yeah. Likely, could be.
Yep. Good. Any other thoughts or?
Well, I was just going to add, I think, you know, it seems to be an ongoing challenge to get better competition in rural areas and also PDE subs and I don't know that I don't have a silver bullet on that one. The only thing that comes to mind is improving competition is making sure that we're giving, you know, that we have adequate time for contractors to be able to prepare bids, that we're not kind of rushing it. And then also to the extent that we can have like better communication about the project in advance and, you know, making sure that the scope and the risks are well known. If there's any way to improve kind of that pre-bid communication so that people have the best information they can have.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And on this particular project, we did have a mandatory pre-bid requirement. So we put notice out to contractors ahead of time, made them come to a meeting so we could kind of walk through what this project is and some of those concern areas. And so we did have that on this particular bridge, and we had quite a few contractors show up to that. But as you get into those rural areas, especially on the South Coast, we have a lot of projects that bid with one bidder. And so it gets difficult when you have just kind of Knife River in an area, you got Tidewater in an area. As you go further south, then it's a long trip for other contractors. And so, yeah, it does get difficult. And we do a lot of things with trying to develop and provide material sources. So maybe, if it's a paving job, we have material available that we can give them out of our own sites to try and increase that competition. So we look at various areas that we can help that, but it's still difficult. And then you got to have a contractor that's willing to utilize those.
Would it be worthwhile to reach out to some of the ones who attended the pre-bid but didn't submit a bid and see if they can give you some reasons that they weren't interested and maybe there's some ideas there of what you could do different?
Yeah, possibly.
I can tell you some of it. Number one, it depends on where the job is, and that was a tough site. You go down there as a bridge builder and you look at all the boulders, all the hard bottom, all the stuff you got to look at, how far you are away from your sources. And you got to really think hard about, is this a project I want to take on? At the same time, you're looking at what else is bidding in the area. And do I want to go after this one or go after another one? What's going to be the easiest, the best, and where do I go? So as a contractor, you're looking at multiple things. Now, Hamilton was set up because of the work they had done on the river right in Eugene, and they had the work bridge, they had all the material to be on a hard rock bottom, and every contractor knows that, so they know they're competing with Hamilton. Hamilton's already got everything. I've got to pay for it and develop it. That's going to kick me out. So you'll tend to walk away and look at another project. As far as DBEs, it's always difficult to get them to travel a long way from home and do work. It's always been an issue. I don't know how we'd ever cure it, but most of our DBEs are in our cities, and they just moving out, getting out in the boonies somewhere is a little difficult for any small contractor to kind of go over. One of the things we don't do well, though, is if we have a minority goal, we may have more minorities on the project than we report. Because if we make the goal of 4% on this job, but we've got 20% minorities, if we report all of the 20%, we're then held to the 20% goal. That changes. And if something happens, then we're in trouble if we can't make the 20%. So most contractors simply make the goal, but you may have more minorities on the job working. And we've never been able to get them to count. I would love to find a way we could without it going back on the contractor. And I think it's something we ought to look at.
Yeah,
Thanks, Ted. Yeah.
I appreciate that input. From my standpoint, what I've understood in the past is, this particular one, we had a 4%, we're almost at 8%, that we're able to take that 8% credit as achieving part of our statewide goal, but we didn't increase the requirement on the contractor. Their requirement remained at that 4%. And so we exceeded our requirement or our goal, yet by the reporting, we were able to show a bigger credit towards our statewide goal because we actually achieved that 8%.
Yeah. And what I'm saying is many times we have certified minorities on the project, but we don't because, and we should count them so we really know who's working on the job and where we really are with minorities on projects.
Yeah.
Ted, is that because of it's more work to report it?
It's not for us. What it is if we have a minority, our goal's 5% and we report 10, and then we have a minority that fails or goes out of business on us, we've got to make that back up somehow. and up to 10. And if you can't find somebody, then you're out of contract. So we don't like to give more because we have to live to that higher goal. And if anything happens, you kind of created a nightmare for yourself in trying to replace them with another minority and that type of thing.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, Ted. Yeah, because at the time of bid, when you're submitting your documents, you've got to, in essence, kind of certify your DBE folks at the beginning of, hey, here's who we're going to use. And it does kind of set that, hey, you agreed to use them for this percentage, this amount. And if you don't achieve that, then yes, okay, well, how are you going to replace that? What are you going to do different? You're right. You are held to that. But if it's not on your initial list, we can still count it and take credit for it once the project's underway. But if you did that up front, yeah, you do get held to some of that.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Ted.
Is there a way to have kind of the actual minority participation reported at the end of the job so that, you know, you're not held to the higher number, but you get the good data? Do you do that?
Well, and that's basically what I shared was the actuals at the end of the project. So yes, we do collect that through various interviews or other things that we do. But you have to identify upfront on the project your DBEs and your contracted amount that you have with them. And that's what Ted's referring to, that, you know, there's reluctancy to put all of them down, even if you're going to be using them up front, because now you're going to be held to, well, you said you were using them and going to pay them this amount. If that work changes or part of it goes away, now you're not paying them that. Well, how are you going to make that up? How are you going to make that whole? Because that's your committed DBEs.
Yes, I guess what I'm thinking is that as you report out, like the data that you're giving us, is here's our goal, here's the bid, and here's the actual, so that it's a clearer picture that we are, you know, that we can show that we're actually having more success than the bid amount. I think it's telling the story in a more complete way.
Yeah, and we do track that.
Yeah, so in the future, like when you come to a committee like this, or you report out to the OTC, having all those data points would be really helpful, I think.
Yeah, good.
Rod, you got your hand up?
Well, first of all, I want to agree with everything Ted and Sharon has said at this point. I think that they're both right. I mean, there's got to be a good way to tell the story, but there's got to be a way, especially working in rural areas, how do we get the job done without undercutting the contractor down the road? So I really appreciate that. What I was initially going to say is that as a person who drove over this road for 3 years, 4 times a week for 3 years, and now I went over this road, I was about 5 weeks ago. All I got to say is thank you, bless you, please do another one. Because I have been in that, oh my God, here goes my mirror moment on that bridge with a log truck. I trust me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Rod. Appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that.
Good. Anything else?
And I can share just real quick, you know, kind of around the DBE line. So our goal was 4%. The contractor had committed to that 7.95. That was their committed DBEs that they certified up front when they did the project. And then, like I said, as we tracked it, they exceeded that. They kind of met that 7.95 that they committed. They didn't really go over that one. But they did commit to that up front, and then they are kind of held to that once we are under contract. And so we do track those things. And so I just wanted to verify that that was their committed DBE with the time of award.
Good. All right. Leah, do you want us to hand it back to you, or how do you want to do that, Sharon?
Sure. I think we're going to maybe have little follow-up from Tova, is that right?
All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much. It was
Darren.
really,
Thanks, Chris.
really informative.
Great job, guys.
Thank you.
So as Leah shared at the beginning of the meeting, I did a little bit of work to put together a list of what projects we expect will be coming in front of the CIAC over the next 4 years. For similar updates and presentations. So I just wanted to share that list today, if that's all right with everyone here. So I'm going to share my screen here just a second.
And I'll just jump in and add. So I know that as the Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee, right? I mean, I think the conversation we just had about the projects over 50 million was super helpful and informative, especially around kind of lessons learned and next steps. But I just want to acknowledge that as we were prepping for this meeting, we realized that we didn't necessarily have a tracking mechanism in place to be able to identify this. So I think just having this kind of standard out there, I guess, if you will, to say like what's in front of us, like what are we actually going to be looking at in the future, gave us a minute to kind of take a step back. And I really appreciate Tova leaning into this to kind of do that quick assessment of like what else is out there, because we didn't necessarily have that. So I just appreciate that as part of our continuous improvement through this process. So go ahead, Tova.
Yeah, absolutely. So so there are these 7 projects that we've identified, and I anticipate Oregon is in preparation right now, and I expect that will also get slotted in here probably in maybe in 2027, but it could be as late as 2028. So and I will keep tabs on that and keep you all up to date. But the plan is to continue with these presentations in the summer. So what I've looked at is projects that we expect will be completed prior to each of the next four like August time periods. So that's the Bend North Corridor project that's presently in construction for next summer, and then in summer of 2026 we'd be presenting the 217 project and I-5 Kubler Delaney, and potentially the I-205 Abernathy Bridge seismic retrofit. Although there's definitely been some conversations about schedule, and so that might push to summer of 2027. And then in 27, the Foothill Corridor project, which is a partnership with a local agency, and then the Van Buren Bridge project, and then in 2028, the I-5 Aurora Donald interchange. So those projects all meet the $50 million or greater cost threshold, and I really appreciate today's presentation. I think that we will be refining the template, if you will, for the things we want to cover, and a lot of the details, particularly around change orders and potential claims, how we've managed risks, both schedule and cost risks, over the course of construction, or from design through construction. I think those will all be topics, and I think all of those projects will have interesting stories and a lot of lessons learned. And I can say that we're already taking lessons from many of those projects as they're in construction and adjusting our practices on like as we prepare current projects for bidding and construction. So continuous improvement is continuous, which is a beautiful thing. And I guess, are there any questions about this suite of projects?
I'm curious. I'm trying to remember what the language was that established the CIAC and what it says about projects over 50 million. Is it that the CIAC should do something specific about this? Does it specifically talk about waiting till the project's over to get a briefing? I'm just trying to make sure that we're giving you what the intent was.
the language as I've read it is that it is looking at projects post like once they've been completed, and we defined completion by second note. So in some cases projects haven't third noted and they've come here. But I'm not sure if there's other language in in the establishment of CIAC that calls out ongoing updates separately, and or if that's something that we could be identifying. Leah, I don't know if that's something that you've looked at or not.
Yeah, I put the language from the bill in the chat. And I think that's actually one of the conversations that Tova and I had is like, when in the process does this act like, so there's a little bit of ambiguity about like the when around this. And so I think we have taken a little bit of liberties and kind of how to the way that Tova just described it, how we're defining the timeline associated with that. But I think that as long as we are clear in how we're defining, and I think we have the opportunity to kind of look at it in whatever way makes the most sense.
So it almost makes it sound like are we reporting back to the legislature on what we've learned from the review 6 months prior to the date of the report required?
I think we are reporting to the Transportation Commission.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like since we got one under our belt now today, and I see these others coming, it maybe makes sense that there is a compiled lessons learned or after action list that kind of keeps the continuous improvement theme going. And that, you're all getting better at this as you do new and different things. I mean, I'm just wanting to make sure we give the right value back to the review.
Well, and it's clear that we actually have to come up with some kind of a report. So yeah, I think your suggestion of, our review and our ideas or thoughts or whatever suggestions should be included in that. And yeah, so we need to work on compiling the report.
I think I heard today one of the requests for us to look at is sort of the accumulation of liquefaction mitigation, ground improvement related opportunities to adjust how we go about designing and putting those out to bid. So I see that as an action item, and I've already started to reach out to a couple folks to get that underway. Leah, you and I can talk offline about what format of that and bringing that back to this group. So
go ahead, Rod.
I just wanted to say that I think one of the major things out of these reports has to be, you're correct, Paula, we've got to get that for lack of a better report done, but we need to put down, what did we learn? What did we learn? How does it apply to future projects? For example, just mentioned the water, the soil. We've got to make note of that because it's going to be coming up over and over and over again. And so how do we learn from this project to make our next projects better? I mean, if lay people who aren't contractors, I know Ted, you are, but lay people who aren't contractors can see it. We've got to know that everyone else is going to see it. And so if we can answer those questions to the OTC, then I think it helps, for lack of a better word, put the right, I don't want to use the word, but the right spin on things. Because one of the things that I hear in my conversation with folks is A, ODOT doesn't do anything, B, and they don't know what they're doing when they do it. And I'm like, well, actually, no. They do this, 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 and this. They're restrained by this, 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 and this. And trust me when I say they're doing the best job they can with the amount of money we give them. Right. And the more we can get out into the public of what the agency does and does well, how they're changing to meet new guidelines, how they're, doing all these things. I didn't know about the DBE requirements until today. That's awesome. Okay. That's something else I can mention to people. Okay. And that's what I'm getting at, is that we need to be talking about it in our constituencies. I'll be talking about it with mayors because that's my constituency. But we need to get the word out that, you're doing good work. That bridge is a testament to some really doggone good work. And the price tag was right. It wasn't overblown, right? So what do we all hear about? We hear about Portland. Well, down here, they did a great job in a rural area of the state and brought it in at budget. So I think that needs to be broadcast just as much as anything else does.
Great. Well, Leah, do you want to do a wrap up and then we can end on time?
Yes, thank you, Chair Smith. I think most of it, my recap is just kind of reiterating, I think, what we've kind of doubled down on in this. And it's a couple of things, and bringing back the lessons learned that we, once we have the claims finalized and done on Scottsburg, right, I think we can bring back the lessons learned and kind of maybe identify some trends that we see in that. And then I think the other big thing was leaning into compiling lessons learned and having an ongoing after action to make sure that as we are looking at these big projects, we really are applying what we have learned to other things that are coming forward. And then I also noted the specific examples on those. So that's my recap.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We are going to be taking a break in September. And then our next meeting will be October 16th, where we're going to get to meet our new Office of Equity and Civil Rights Assistant Director, and maybe some project cost estimating depending upon timing. So have a good September, and it's hard for me to say we're going to meet in October because it feels like I don't know what happened to this year.
Yeah. Thank you. Good information today.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Chris.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you, everyone.
thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Take care.
Bye.